And then Proclus has an argument that being becomes a second unity, so that the next principle is life, the principle of distinction of unity. And here, the gods responsible are a few those he calls Uranos and night, and the connector gods. Anyway, and what these gods do is that they introduce the principle that there are different levels or kinds of being, a discrete amount that are, and that each Hanad or god is responsible for them. So now, here again, we have not only the fact that Proclus is always thinking about being as a whole, but also that he wants to introduce principles for its systematic properties. For instance, it is made up of many different kinds of being, many different levels of being. And so that is what the principle of life introduces. It's this meta property of discreteness as such. He also refers to this as the first part of life itself, which is number itself. But we don't have to get into that. Okay. So, but however, just like previously, the gods transcend their union in being, so does the unity of being transcend the divisions of life, and not everything is divided, and for that reason I haven't made this division reaching down to the center, but rather have left some space where, in order to also mark here that just as there was an excess of the Hanads over being, there was also an excess of being over life. Right? I draw that as a smaller blue circle, just as I drew the being previously as a large blue circle. So besides this distribution of being to the many different divinities, there's also, however, a union of divine powers, a union of the excess of divine powers that exceeds it. And so just as unity was responsible just as much for being as it was for the excess of divine powers, also being is responsible both for life and also for this union of the excess. And then, after he explains he argues for the existence of life and its structuring of being, its division of it into many different kinds, but at the same time assuring both the union of the many kinds into one being and also their plenitude, he derives another principle, which is intelligence, nous, which is responsible for the completeness of being, right? That being is in itself, that it's self-contained. This is his interpretation of the argument in the Parmenides that unity itself is in itself, right? And that's the beginning of intelligence for Proclus. And here in intelligence, again, we have a number of gods that are relevant. We have Cronus, the first of them, and also Zeus and Rhea, and also really important, what he calls the diaphragmatic principle, right? Which we'll see is an important structural principle, right? Because just as number was responsible for the structural property that there is many different kinds of being, intelligence, being responsible for the perfection and closing off of being, is also responsible for there being the chasm of there being and its other, becoming, right? And so it's this diaphragmatic principle which Proclus sees indicated in all the myths about one god castrating another or somehow binding another. We have the principle for the cutting off of all the previous principles and their distinction from something else. And so it's only from this perspective now that we have, so to speak, two worlds. And until now, all the deductions and all the principles were principles for everything. But now we get two worlds. And so I'm going to indicate that here by drawing here a line of separation. So here we'll do a line of separation here, right, between, and then on this side we get the intelligible, and this side we're going to get the perceptible, right? Or rather, better, over here we're going to get eternal things, and here we get things in becoming. But again, and here we see this in the drawing itself, life is more abundant. Life is more abundant than intellect. There is life on the other side. Life cannot be contained in just the perfect being, the perfect timeless and eternal being of the forms. And so there's this excess of life that we have, and here in becoming, and this excess is precisely what becomes then what is the matter for living beings, right? And all of these things become the perceptible world by action of the demiurge or engineer of the perceptible world, which is Zeus. And so it is through Zeus that all these things say that this then becomes matter for bodies, this becomes bodies, these things become, each of them, the multiplicity of living beings. Right? And again, we see Proposition 57 in action. Life gives rise both to intellect and also to living beings. But the system does not stop there, but rather, so intelligence itself is productive, and it produces the perceptible world, and especially the heavens, as it were, as an image of themselves, of perfect being. So, and it is not by chance that this might recall you a scheme of drawing heavens and the earth. But but the primary, right. I'm sorry, I'm going to start that again. So, intelligence is productive, and it produces a copy of itself, a copy of perfect being, which is the soul, right? The souls which constantly contemplate perfect being and therefore mimic it, however, in time, right? And what exists with order, but altogether in perfect being, becomes an unfolded order within time. And so in that way, intelligence produces soul, but soul itself cannot grasp the perfection of intellect entirely, which is why intellect also produces something that exceeds soul, which is actually the heavens and the heavenly bodies, which in their perfection and never and everlastingness, in the way that they don't change, mimic intellect in a way that the soul itself couldn't. So intellect then produces all the souls, and together with their heavenly bodies. So even our souls, initially, as they come out of the hands of the demiurge, they receive heavenly bodies. Each of us has an astral body. Each of our souls has an astral body, to be more correct, according to Proclus. Right? So, here we get, I'm running out of space here, but here we get the souls with bodies. Right? So, I don't know, like moon, and the soul of the moon, the sun, and the soul of the sun. And sometimes just a star in its soul, or then the souls of mortals and other spirits with their assigned celestial bodies around the gods. So in this way, intelligence produces both soul and also the excess, which is the astral body. We see that we're coming close to the end. And now, what does the soul produce? The soul produces first of all, its primary product, the primary, and now I'm talking about the transmigrating soul, the kind of soul that we have. It produces primarily the human being, the rational animal. This is what it gives life to in the first place. However, once again, the soul has in itself the images of all the forms and all the gods, and it therefore has the ability to give life to all different kinds of living beings. So that's why we have to, according to Proclus, most people have to lead animal-like lives so that after they die, their souls will go on to give life to different animals. Now, we saw already that life, the principle of life, is responsible for the existence of living beings. But what individual souls do, and they're required by Proclus' system to do this, is they have to give each animal, specifically animals and not plants, an individual private life of its own motions, which is distinct from the species life. So Proclus thinks that every plant is more or less the same. They all lead the same lives, and they just are doing different things because they're in different circumstances. They're that same thing in a different set of circumstances with a different matter. Whereas he thinks that each animal has its own individual life, and the individual life of this animal is given by the soul. And that way, even with the soul, we reach finally the end of the system, because the soul properly doesn't produce something new, it just gives life, and it gives these different kinds of lives. But here we've reached the connection of the system, and with that we've finished it. Now I'm going to wipe this, and then I'm going to show what the whole system looks like just looking at proposition 57. Okay, just to finish up, so this is a presentation of Proclus's system according to his proposition 57 of the elements of theology, right? According to which each cause produces its immediate effects, and also things that exist after the last effects of that effect. And so we'll see how everything obeys this principle, right? So we have unity produces immediately both being, the union of all the gods, and also the excess of the power of the gods relative to being, right? Being, in turn, it produces both life, the principle of division and organization of being, its formal structure, as well as it produces a unity of these excess powers that is not structured, that goes beyond the structuring power of life. Life, in turn, produces both intelligence, the completion of being, and also it produces the irrational power that exceeds the perfection and the closeness of intelligence. Intelligence, in turn, produces both its copy soul, as well as the astral bodies, the whole heavens, which mimic intelligence in their unchangingness in a way that soul never could. And in this way, the astral bodies are, as it were, an excess of intelligence over the changing nature of soul's thoughts. Also, intelligence is where we get the cut, right? Where we get the cut in between the perfection of being and the changing nature of the perceptible. And so through it, and through especially one unparticipated intelligence, or kind of intelligence, the demiurge, right, the engineer of the world, Zeus, the excess power of the gods becomes prime matter, the unity of power that exceeds the structuration of life becomes body, the irrational powers of life become living beings. And then finally, these living beings generated by life are living beings without an individuality of their own, right? It's living beings insofar as they only have a common nature, common to the whole species, but then soul will produce both humans, which are the rational animal, which can represent the changing, transmigrating soul to the best of its capacity, and also, when that human dies, and after having led a vicious life, goes on to animate other kinds of animals, all the other kinds of individual animals on Earth that have individual lives, unlike, say, plants, according to Proclus, which only have their common species life. And with this, we see how the principle of what's called bracketed causality sometimes, since each thing produces the first and also the last, is present throughout Proclus's system. And that's it for this video, and I hope that you like it and share it and come back for the other videos. Thanks.